Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Caitlin and this is Catnip Dreams of Food. And today is going to be a little bit different than episodes past, which are traditionally centered around food. Today I just wanted to talk about all of these really great books that I've read recently, probably in the last 6 to 8 months. And then a bunch of new books that I received during the holidays that I'm really excited to read. And I also kind of wanted to update you guys on some changes to my channel. I know right now, the name being Catnip Dreams of Food, it's very much centered around food and food history and food culture and taste tests and all these things that I really enjoy doing. And I have a lot of other interests besides just cooking and talking about food. So I did an Instagram poll on my Instagram, Catnip Dreams of Food, and asked you guys if you'd be interested in some different content besides food and like the food history and the taste test, which don't worry, I'll continue to do those things because I enjoy them. But I kind of wanted to branch out a little bit. So some of the topics that were really popular were talking about maybe the supernatural or science fiction type of stories. I don't know. There's this one podcast I listen to, it's called Wild Thing, and the first season was on Bigfoot, and the second was like called Space Invaders, and it is as crazy as it sounds. And it's amazing, and you should definitely listen to it. But I also, maybe conspiracy theories, vacation planning tips, makeup. I really wish I would have filmed my Halloween makeup, but if you look at my Instagram, I do have 3 different makeup looks, very heavily Lady Gaga inspired because she's the best. But anyway, and there was a few other topics I can't even remember at this point. But anyway, I just want to kind of branch out besides just doing food, and I definitely would like to do more kind of daily vlogging. Obviously we can't really go anywhere right now, but once we can start going places, or when the weather breaks and I can go hiking or, you know, canoeing, kayaking. I don't have a GoPro, so I probably can't do that. I don't want to break this camera. But I want to start kind of going out and doing different things. So with that being said, I'm thinking about probably changing the name of the channel to just Catnip Dreaming. So if you see that change, it's still me. I just don't want it to be so focused on food. Coffee. So let's get right into the book review. So it's going to be quite a few books. I'm not going to go really into detail on any of them because first of all, I don't want to spoil it for you. And second of all, there's a lot of books to cover. And it's probably equal amount of books that I've read and ones that I want to read this year. I'm definitely challenging myself to read at least a book a week. Actually Tim just showed me the Goodreads app that I didn't know about. So I can start logging all the different books that I've read in the past, and it's helping to give me different recommendations, and it's, you know, based on my reading patterns of maybe genres or things that I would really like. So you're gonna see the book genres kind of are all over the place, and I think it's good to have a variety when you read. This is my stack of books that I've read through the past year, and the top one is what I'm actually currently reading that I started, I believe, yesterday, and I'm already halfway through because it's so good. But yeah, these are the books that I've read, so I'll kind of go through them briefly, and I guess I'll start with the one that I'm reading right now. So this is the book that I'm currently reading right now. It's called The Midnight Library, and it's phenomenal. I am halfway through the book, as you can see. Do you like my ripped magazine bookmark? That's how I do it. But I'm about halfway through this book, and essentially what it is I don't know if you guys have ever seen the show The OA, but there's this kind of idea of like multiple universes and different versions of your life. That's to put it very broadly because that show is incredibly layered and really interesting, and I could do a whole episode on that. And if you are interested in that, probably not, I can. But essentially there's this woman that is very unhappy with her life, and she constantly thinks about all the things that she could have done in her past. Like she had a swimming career, about potentially going after a swimming career when she was really young because she was really talented, about potential relationships and a marriage that she could have been part of. But essentially she basically ends up in this midnight library because she decides to take her own life. And before she actually dies, and I'm only halfway through, so this is just my brief synopsis, but all these books are different paths that her life could have taken, and they're based on this book of regrets, and these are all the things that she thinks would have been different choices that she could have made in her life, and that her life would be a lot different. And so basically she's going through these different scenarios of how her life could have been. So it's very, very good. I think it's very relatable because I think, you know, we all regret a lot of the choices that we made in our lives or what could have been. So it's an excellent book. I did get this from my mother-in-law for Christmas, so thank you. I'll let you guys know my final thoughts when I finish it. So the next book is called The Essex Serpent. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. And I'm just gonna read the review on the back because that basically kind of sums up the entire book itself. And I really liked this. I will say it was pretty hard to get through. It was very well written. Definitely was one that I really had to kind of push myself to get through. It was excellent, but it's not as easy of a read as like The Midnight Library, which is very good, but if you're looking for something just kind of to read casually before bed, maybe it's not the right book for that. But I'm just gonna read the New York Times review of it on the back, and it actually won a New York Times Notable Book of the Year. So part ghost story and part natural history lesson, part romance and part feminist parable. I found it so transporting that 48 hours after completing it, I was still resentful to be back home. And it definitely has a mythical kind of element to it, a little bit of folklore, but ultimately it's about the character growth and development throughout the book. So it's really good, but this is one that you have to really be in the mood to read. It took me I was reading other books while I read this one, but it probably took me about 2 months to read, which is a lot longer than normal. I actually had to put it down and read different genres. So really good, but definitely hard to get through. All right, the next 2 books are by the same author, Jasper Fforde, and he's one of my favorite authors. And the 2 books are The Air Affair and Lost in a Good Book. And they are metafiction, so they basically take place in other stories and other books. And basically Jane Eyre is taken out of the book. And there's this investigative group in the future, but it's really not the future. It's supposed to be in 1985. But it's a different reality where there's different stages in the government, and one of them is to basically monitor books, and literature is taken very seriously. So the main character is Thursday Next, and she takes her job very seriously, and it's very quirky. It's part satire, and if you are a lover of classic novels, I think you'll really enjoy this. And then this second one, it also follows Thursday Next, and as you can tell by the title, it's going to be another one and it dives into lots of different books like Great Expectations and Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, and it's really fun, and I don't know, I really like these. Very quirky in the way that he writes, and actually one of the books that I want to read this year is also by the same author. Alright, so I sometimes like to read like young adult books, so this one's called Splinter, and I absolutely love Alice in Wonderland, so that's what drew me to this book. So essentially what it's about is this girl, I believe her name is Alyssa, and she starts hearing like bugs start talking to her and flowers start talking to her, and she doesn't really have a grasp on reality. And it turns out that her great-great-grandmother was the Alice that Lewis Carroll wrote about in Alice in Wonderland. So she does go to Wonderland, and it's very different than the Wonderland that we are used to based on Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. But it's a really, really fun, easy book, and I really liked it. I like young adult books because they are an easy read, and they definitely have like a fantasy element to them. And if you're a Disney lover and you like Alice in Wonderland, I would really highly recommend this. I think it took me like less than a week to read because it was really easy. I think it's about 400 pages, which isn't too crazy. But yeah, it's called Splintered, and it's pretty good. All right, the next book is called The Overstory, and it's by Richard Powers. And very similar to the Essex Serpent, this one took me a very long time to read. It's a phenomenal book, and it's kind of a mixture of different stories within one book, but the underlying theme is really focused on the natural world, and trees are the underlying theme and element of this book, and it really makes you think about the natural world and how the natural world is going to be there whether we're here or not, and that we are only a part of the story. And it's a phenomenal book, but it took me probably 2 or 3 months to read. It won the National Book Award, the Pulitzer Prize, it won all these awards, and it was actually Britt Marling, the star of the OA, as you can tell, very obsessed with that show, that recommended this book on her Instagram, and it's one of the best books I've ever read, but definitely challenging to get through. Incredible book, definitely will make you think about the impact that you make every day, or the lack of an impact that you make every day, and how the world continues to move on around you. And phenomenal book, highly recommend this, but be ready to really take your time, and there's so many layers in each story that is told within the pages of this book. All right, this is the book that I finished most recently, and it's called Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, and she might be my new favorite author. This book is phenomenal. So it's slightly dystopian kind of fiction, but it's the story of this really, really amazing and strong young woman that has to go through so much pain and struggle in her life, and how she basically comes out of that a stronger person. And that's kind of a very brief synopsis of this, but in the actual book itself, it's dystopian future, and it's actually, it takes place in the early 2020s, so a little too close to home there. But essentially the world is basically collapsed around everybody because of the environment, and the government has become very corrupt, and this takes place in California. And her father is a preacher and very religious man, but she's seeing what's going on around her in the world, and she finds it very hard to believe that the religions of the past really resonate with the world, with how it is now. So she comes up with this religion called Earthseed, and it's basically about how change is the only constant in the world. And it kind of gets more science fiction-y than that. And actually, one of the books that I've asked for and that I'll get into is the second book in this series, and I'm really excited to read it. But this is some of the best writing that I've ever really read. And it was very easy to read. If you're a fan of, I would say, like The Handmaid's Tale, I think this would really resonate with you. It's a strong, powerful woman character. Very engaging, but also full of layers, and I would highly recommend this. Actually, I think, yeah, 3 of the books that I'm looking to read this year are also by Octavia Butler, so phenomenal writer. All right, so the next book is called Near the Exit, and it's Travels with the Not So Grim Reaper by Laurie Erickson. And the reason I chose to read this book at the time is I was going through a very hard loss in my family, and this book just kind of spoke to me. I saw it when I was at Barnes & Noble one day, and essentially what it is, it's like kind of like a travel book in some ways. So the writer herself looks into different cultures and how mortality and death are perceived by that culture, and the different traditions and viewpoints, and how as humans we have to deal with this really terrible thing, and how to deal with it. So definitely not a very uplifting read, but if you're going through a really challenging time, and in some ways, not that it has answers, but it makes you connect to those around you. Realize that we're all, we all have challenging times, and we can all connect with that. And if you're a fan of kind of travel books, I wouldn't say it's really a travel book, but you're learning about different cultures. And if you're very interested in anthropology or history, it's a very interesting read. Even though it's a pretty small book, it's under 200 pages, it definitely took me some time to read because I really wanted to take in the different traditions and different cultures regarding mortality and death. But really good book. It was what was needed at the time, and I would recommend it if you're going through a challenging time. All right, we're going to a completely different genre. This is called The Babylon Rite by Tom Knox, and if you're a fan of conspiracy theories and books regarding the Knights Templar and the Freemasons and all of these crazy conspiracies, it's a fun read. This is definitely, like, I would say, a vacation book read, but it's got 2 main plot lines that obviously come together at the end. But it basically has this mystery of the Knights Templar, and then meanwhile there's another storyline in Peru with a lost Stone Age civilization, and the 2 are interconnected, and it's a very suspenseful and kind of silly book, but I really liked it. If you're a fan of like the Da Vinci Code and like Angels and Demons and those kind of like conspiracy theory kind of books, it's definitely an easy read. I wouldn't say that I'm very proud to say that I read it, but it's good, it's fun. I like science fiction and conspiracy theory kind of books because they're really easy, and my dad gave me this one and I read it in probably 2 days, so it was a fun one. All right, the next book is nonfiction. So most of the books that I've gone through have either been some type of memoir, travel, or fiction, but this is called Consciousness and the Brain, so deciphering how the brain codes our thoughts. So I'm very interested in consciousness and how do we measure consciousness, what does that mean to science, and this book is not easy to read. I read it in short spouts because it's definitely very scientifically written, but basically the whole reason that the author wrote this book is where do our thoughts, feelings, and dreams come from, and the root of consciousness. And it's a very good book. I'm really interested in this kind of topic about alternate realities and consciousness and things like that, kind of going to the OA. That's why I chose this. But a very interesting book, definitely one that will take you some time. So I would have a few other books that you're reading at the same time. I think I was reading this at the same time as like The Babylon Rite, so it was good to have something to kind of break it up. That was an easier book, but very interesting, and if you're interested in this topic, I would highly recommend this. And then the last book that I read, well, the last book that I can remember, I know I read more books, but I really couldn't even remember, which is why I wish I would have used Goodreads before yeah, yesterday. But I'll try, if I think of more books that I read, I'll definitely share them with you. But this is called Cersei, and I definitely have seen this shared around different sites as being a book that is recommended and is very popular right now. But if you're interested in Greek mythology and the story of Cersei, it's a very interesting book. I really liked it. I love Greek mythology or anything having to deal with mythology, and it was really well written, very easy to read. I would highly recommend this. Alright guys, so I have my next stack of books, and these are all the ones that I want to read this year. I'm pretty excited to talk about these, so I'll probably read more books than this year, but these are the ones that I want to go after first. Alright, the first, and this was a gift from my grandma, the first thing that I want to read, well not the first thing, I already started the Midnight Library, but one of the things that I want to read is it's the His Dark Materials series, and I think the one that's the most well known would be The Golden Compass, but I saw that movie when I was younger. The His Dark Materials is a really popular show on HBO right now, and it kind of has this steampunk kind of feel, and it's definitely kind of like a dystopian feel but with fantasy, and I'm pretty excited to read these. I've never read them. I actually didn't even ask for these for Christmas, but my grandma just knew that I was interested in this series, so thank you. But pretty excited about reading these. I'll let you guys know what I think. Alright, so I already talked about Parable of the Sower, but these are the 3 books by Octavia Butler that I really want to read. So I'll start with The Parable of the Talents, which is the next book in the Earthseed series, which is the one that Parable of the Sower is part of. And I'm really excited to read this because I want to know what happens in the story. And I don't want to spoil it for you by giving you the ending of the previous book, but it's definitely a really interesting series. Well, I only read the first book, but the main character is just so relatable and so strong, and I just want to see what happens. So I'm really excited for this one. And I don't know which one's the first one in this. It's from the Patternist series. I think this is the first one. But anyway, so these are another series, but these kind of look similar to that kind of like dystopian future kind of feeling, and strong female characters are very present in these books. So I really enjoyed her style of writing, so I didn't really do a lot of research into the actual storyline of these books. I just knew when I find an author that I really like, kind of similar to Jasper Fforde, I just continue to read more books by them. Alright, the next book is actually one that Tim bought for me for my birthday a few years ago, but then he forgot to give it to me, and then he ended up reading it before me, which he loved this book, and he and I tend to have similar taste in books. He definitely likes a lot more serious books. I like my young adult books and conspiracy theory books, but I also really appreciate books on deeper topics. So Haruki Murakami is the author, and it's called Hardboiled, Wonderland, and the End of the World. And I'm just gonna read the back because I can't really remember what this is about. Hyperkinetic and relentlessly inventive, Hardboiled, Wonderland, and the End of the World is a deep dive into the very nature of consciousness. I think you're seeing a theme. Across 2 parallel narratives, it draws readers into a mind-bending universe in which Bob Dylan, Lauren Bacall, a split-brained data professor, a deranged scientist, his shockingly undemure granddaughter, and various thugs, librarians, and subterranean monsters collide to a dazzling effect. What emerges as a novel is at once hilariously funny and a deep, serious meditation on the nature and uses of the mind. This sounds right up my alley. Seems kind of, I don't know, all over the place. Definitely has fantasy or kind of science fiction element to it based on the description, about really digging into consciousness, and I'm sure that's going to be the underlying theme, which is very exciting for me, but very excited to read this one. I know this one took Tim a while to read, so I'm gonna guess this is going to be one that I have to really push through because it's probably really well written and not my typical young adult books that are pretty easy to read. Alright, this was one I just picked up at Target when I was shopping, and it was 20% off. That's why I bought it, and I just forgot that I bought this. But it's called Girls Like Us, and based on the description, if you've read like Gone Girl or Sharp Objects or Girl on the Train, it's kind of a thriller kind of book. I actually started it, but I've lost my place, so I'm just gonna restart it. But it's the protagonist is an FBI agent whose father just passed away, and she comes back to her hometown, and then there's a series of different murders that happen in her hometown, and I'm assuming that some of it has to probably connect to her past, and I'm sure she's gonna help solve them. I don't really know, but that's just my assumption. But if you like thrillers or anything of like true crime kind of books, which I love watching true crime documentaries and listening to true crime podcasts, Crime Junkie is the best podcast ever, in case you're wondering. But this one just looks like a pretty easy read. and I'm sure I'll really enjoy it. All right, so this, I told you about Jasper Fforde earlier, but this is one of his books. It's not part of the Thursday Next series. Those 2 books are part of that, but it's called Shades of Grey. And oh my god, it says Welcome to Chromatica. Anybody else obsessed with Chromatica? Best album ever by Lady Gaga? Well, apparently that's where this book takes place, so I'm already very interested. So it's a society through a social hierarchy based upon one's limited color perception. In this world, you are what you can see. That sounds very interesting. I'm sure it's going to be full of satire, and I'm excited to read this. I love his style of writing. It looks a little bit more sci-fi than I mean, The Airfare was definitely sci-fi-ish, but this looks a little bit more into that genre, so I'm excited to read this. All right, so every year for Christmas, the tradition that my grandma has for Christmas is she gets me a different book of poetry every single year, and this is the one that she got me this year, which it's called Empty Bottles Full of Stories. I'm really excited to read this. I like to read poetry between different fiction or nonfiction that I'm reading, and I read a few of the poems already, and they're very beautiful. And I really do like the style of poetry, the style of writing. So yeah, I'm really excited to read this. I love my little tradition with my grandma. I have a whole bookshelf just filled with different books of poetry that she either got me or, you know, that I've collected, you know, through the years based on recommendations from her. So thank you, Grandma. All right, the next book I actually got last year for Christmas, and I must have misplaced it. I just found it when I was going through my bookshelves, but it's called Disoriental, and this is another book that was recommended by Britt Marling, and this is a winner, or a National Book Award finalist, so I'm really excited about this. I don't really remember what this is about, so I'm gonna have to read the inside cover. So the main character, his name is Camilla, I believe, and she is in her 20s, sitting in a fertility clinic in Paris as she awaits life-changing news. She is inundated with memories of her ancestors and family myths that reached her in unstoppable waves. Generations return to her, including her formidable great-grandfather with his harem of 52 wives and her distracted but ardent parents Sarah and Darius, who are opponents of each other's political regimes. Yeah, this sounds really interesting. It looks like it's part history and part memoir. I'm excited about this one. Anything that Britt Marling recommends, I'm really excited to read, and I'm glad that I found this because I did really want to read this at one point, and I just misplaced it, so found it again. All right, and then the last book, if you're a lover of true crime, is Mindhunter. So I'm sure it's on Netflix. There's 2 seasons. It's a Netflix series, but it's basically about the beginnings of the FBI's elite serial killer crime unit, and just kind of understanding what a serial killer is. Takes place, I believe, in the late 60s, early 70s, and I know Ed Kemper is one of the main killers that they kind of interrogate, but I know there's Charles Manson's in there, I think BTK, I can't remember. I watched the series a while ago, but I really liked the series, and I was hoping that maybe the book was even more in depth, and because the books usually give way to more than just the actual series does. Yeah, so excited about this one. Those are all the books that I have today, and it's a pretty good bunch. But as I was going through Goodreads and putting in different books that I recall reading, and I'm sure I'm forgetting so many, I could only get to about 200 last night, but I know I've read more, promise. But there were so many books that came up that were recommended, so my list has grown even more just in one night of books that I want to read. And with my goal being at least 52 books, so 1 book a week, which I think is a pretty attainable goal. I'm sure that there'll be more books that I'll have to read, and I'll have to do another one of these series and kind of review the books that I've already gone over, ones that I want to read. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this kind of break and a little bit different of an episode for my channel, and I hope it inspires you to go out and read. But leave me a comment down below if you're interested in any of the topics that I mentioned before, like maybe doing a makeup video or a video on the supernatural, conspiracy theories, maybe a travel kind of video, a daily vlog. But if there's a topic that you'd like to see, or back to food or cooking or taste tests, just leave me a comment down below, because ultimately I want to create videos that you guys want to watch. But thank you so much, and I'll see you guys soon. Thanks.